Before we get started here, this is, I guess, par for the course when you do any sort of live content. Things interrupt your plans because crazy news happens as soon as you begin your thing. And that is certainly the case with what has just happened for me. I'm, of course, here to talk about Cobra Kai, do a little bit of deep dive into that show. But literally moments before I was about to begin this, I see a notification that Twitter has permanently banned Donald Trump, current US president. This is huge news, and so I have to admit my curiosity, because I have not read this article and I don't know the details. My curiosity is kind of getting the best of me right now. I'm going to do my best, though, to continue on with this and not let this news distract me, because I am here to talk about Cobra Kai. And I have a lot to say, and I think the best place to start is with the people who maybe you've heard of Cobra Kai, maybe you've heard of this show, but you still haven't watched it. Maybe you don't know fully the context. So I'll quickly sum up this show with the beginning point that it is a tremendously successful show by my estimation. The amount of people who love this show, the amount of people, the size of the fan base is really extraordinary, considering it's not the usual thing that gets this much fervent support from a lot of people. And what I mean by that is typically what we've seen the past few years is when nostalgia is like the driving engine of your content, your like reboot sort of thing. It tends to not be the most successful enterprise. There have been a lot of false starts, essentially, for things that have tried to recapture the success of previous properties, only for them to fail miserably. Off the top of my head, I don't know why this is the first thing I thought of, but Men in Black International, a film that came out last year that was really trying hard to recapture the success of the first Men in Black movie, and that, of course, crashed and burned. Did not. It was one of the worst films of last year. All right, now it's 2021, so I can say, the worst films of 2019. But Cobra Kai succeeds, where other reboots, where movies and shows that try to continue old stories and be successful off of nostalgia fail, and they tend to fail pretty miserably. Sometimes they're successful, at least in the short term. People really like Star Wars The Force Awakens the first few months when it came out, and people still like that movie. It's not a bad movie, of course. But, of course, I remember when Force Awakens came out, there was a ton of just consternation toward that Star Wars film being too slavish to, existing Star Wars formula. So what is Cobra Kai's secret? What is it about this show that is somehow good enough and worthy enough to be a successor to The Karate Kid, which was a pop culture milestone in the 1980s, something that basically everybody at the time had watched and had an opinion about? Well, first, what is Cobra Kai? Cobra Kai is a show that originally premiered on YouTube Red. We used to be called YouTube Red, now it's YouTube Premium. A few years ago, YouTube decided they wanted to enter the streaming game with their own original content. Makes sense. YouTube is basically the biggest video sharing platform in the entire world. So the idea to create their own content, because they themselves have the most eyeballs on their content already, sure. And I think the only thing to come out of that with any success was Cobra Kai. The first season, I believe, launched basically alongside a bunch of other original things. It was obviously not the very first original show from YouTube, but I think it was in the first batch at least. And the show took off. I was one of the people who originally watched it on the YouTube channel, and also season 2. And because it's part of my job to have streaming services that would be perceived by some as excessive. So I have had YouTube Premium / YouTube Red basically since it first came out, mainly because I like to watch YouTube videos or listen to YouTube audio all the time. It's one of my favorite podcasting apps, actually, because with YouTube you can literally listen to like lectures and like really intriguing speeches and things like that. And with YouTube Premium, you can do that like on the go. You don't have to have the phone on and drain your battery. You can just listen. So That was the initial reason why I got YouTube Premium. And then, of course, not having the ads is also a nice touch. So Cobra Kai hits YouTube, and second season comes out as well. And it just took people by surprise. People were not expecting this show to be so successful. It begins under the main perspective of Johnny Lawrence, played by William Zabka, who is, of course, reprising his role as the school bully in the original Karate Kid, the person who gives Daniel LaRusso so much trouble. And the show primarily follows his, I don't want to say rise, there is a rise, but his rises and falls, his peaks and lows, as he tries to restart Cobra Kai, a dojo that was instrumental in his upbringing. It was a dojo that kind of facilitated himself as a bully, but now he's trying to find self-respect in it. In the movies, he was a rich, spoiled kid, because as the show kind of carves out, it was really because his stepfather had money, but eventually his stepfather cuts him off, and he is actually living his life kind of similar to how Daniel was introduced to us in the Karate Kid movie. So the tables have kind of turned. Daniel LaRusso is, of course, in the show as well, and played by Ralph Macchio. And that's one of the best things about the show, is that most of these characters are reprising their roles. You see the actors from Karate Kid show up again, which is great. And even though Johnny is the main perspective, and even though Johnny is our main character, he's more of an anti-hero. And the whole point of the show is about perspective. It's about how we all think we're the hero of our own story. And season 3 has, just continued to be a success because it understands how to remix a formula beyond like, I know it is, and so I'm going to like it. There is this Hollywood tendency for, reboots and sequels and things like that to do kind of bare minimum and take very few risks. Because if you do that, people are just going to watch no matter what because they recognize the characters. And they do this because they can get away with it. By their eyes, they can spend less money and it's less risk because in the short term they'll make money. And there you go. Very, very few, very, very rarely do they really recognize the financial impact of constantly putting out terrible content, for lack of a better word. And with Cobra Kai, you see that there is a feverish effort to actually tell a good story first and foremost, while also balance that with the nostalgia. This is not a show that forgets the Karate Kid happened. In fact, it's all built upon the Karate Kid. It's all there. A show kind of similar to it that I think is similarly successful, although to a lesser extent, I don't like it nearly as much, is Saved by the Bell reboot on Peacock. That show, I don't know if any of you have checked it out yet. It's definitely not taking off the same way Cobra Kai has, but Saved by the Bell, the reboot, is another show where I feel like content creators are starting to understand or are starting to have better tools to implement shows and stories that go beyond the source material, that actually can still surprise us. That's like the main problem, is that if your reboot, sequel thing or whatever doesn't surprise people, then there's gonna be a backlash. There's gonna be a lack of satisfaction. And that is what happens with things like Force Awakens, which again, it's not a bad movie or anything, but was there anything in The Force Awakens that really surprised you? Think about Ghostbusters, 2016 film. They were kind of trying to harken back to the Ghostbusters formula, but there was nothing in that movie that felt fresh, that felt like there was a really great story that needed to be told. It's a very simple thing, and I'm not the first person to say it, but I do hope I am one of the champions of the models that do work, and Cobra Kai is a model like that. I haven't mentioned this yet, but there are rough edges to this show, which is something I appreciate. It could be read as a criticism against Cobra Kai, that some of the messaging is really ambiguous. There are things that people say in this show. There are character actions and character behaviors and subtext that I don't really agree with, thematically or politically or anything like that. But that doesn't matter because, first of all, it is okay to appreciate and enjoy and celebrate shows that do not align 100% with your point of view on something. There's a weird balance of this. Like sometimes there can be things that actually do have harmful messaging. I don't think Cobra Kai is one of those shows. Of course, people can maybe misinterpret some of the messages in Cobra Kai and be like, oh, I need to be a bully because Cobra Kai told me so. I think that's a complete misreading of the show, first of all. And it's not the show's responsibility when the show outwardly tries to say, like, hey, violence is only a last resort sort of thing. It's telling a long story to get to that point, and it's depicting the bad behavior to get that point across. The things I don't agree with mainly are just small things here and there with like some things characters say and like some characterizations that I think are straw men and cheap shots, but stuff like that pales in comparison to the really good storytelling, because that's really what you want. I think that what was good about the first season of the show, I think what kind of like hooked me was how they really switched around what you would expect from the character relationships. Light spoilers for the first season. I promise I'm not going to say anything that would ruin your experience if you haven't seen it for the first time. But I will say that there are certain character allegiances that happen in the first season that took me by surprise. It ended up not being the show I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a retcon of Karate Kid, that it was going to be, just trying to redeem Johnny Lawrence by making it so that he was right the whole time. But you quickly learn that that's not the case, and that the show is really about a bully who is totally out of touch and doesn't know what he's doing, just trying to be better. And not only that, but you have the protagonist from the first movie learning that, his side of the story isn't the only side of the story, which gets brought up again, it's very specifically in season 3. What I really liked about season 2 was it started to really lay out the consequences of the toxic behavior of both main characters. How Johnny's approach, while not 100% wrong and definitely not 100% right, would lead to consequences that would negatively affect not just him, but the people he cares about. The same thing goes for Daniel, who gets totally out of balance with this rivalry, and they both have to learn a crazy lesson and all of that. And then what's fantastic about season 3 does this masterful thing where it uses elements of the second and third Karate Kid movie, mainly the third Karate Kid movie, and it uses that nostalgia to lambast nostalgia itself. It is a season that is about you can't just live in the past. I think a character says that very specifically. And it's about how it's okay to be like the 80s were awesome. And, I'm somebody, I didn't live in the 80s. I was born in 90. I missed it. But of course, I've consumed a lot of 80s pop culture, as many other millennials have. And it's great. It seems like it was a fun decade. I'm not going to lie. There are some great films and genre things that came out in the 80s that would never come out in the decades we've had since. Maybe someday we'll swing back around. I don't know. And it's okay to appreciate the 80s on their own terms in that way. And it's okay to watch a film like Karate Kid and be like, man, some of the stuff hasn't aged that well. They might be kind of weird, but you can get caught up in the fun of it. And you can also analyze it thoughtfully and intellectually and be like, hey, what does a show like this, or a movie like this, I should say, really kind of telling us, what were the filmmakers really trying to say with this movie? And there's certainly some things good and bad about it. Although I won't get into detail, I think that everything with Mr. Miyagi was really what the heart of those movies were, and why I think those movies really resonated beyond their initial openings, to be honest. But yeah, like I was saying, season 3 has a whole segment where I won't give it away, but Daniel LaRusso really revisits some key issues that have happened to him, or that happened to him in some of the other films. And he kind of learns that he didn't know everything about, or he didn't know everything that Mr. Miyagi taught him. He didn't know everything about his style of karate. There's a line in the show where he kind of recognizes that he is the same age that Mr. Miyagi was in the first Karate Kid film, which is pretty huge in the context of the show. It really kind of puts things in perspective. And I appreciate it so much because this is where other shows, I think, do fail when they try to bring back these characters. They wrap the characters around the mythology. They wrap the characters around doing the things that you want to see them do again, and that's basically it. It stops there. Whereas this show takes way more effort, or puts more effort into building and furthering the characterization. I think like the difference is, I keep going back to Force Awakens. I'll try to think of another example. But in Force Awakens, you have Han Solo. Han Solo is one of the main characters in that movie, basically. And I struggle to think, what does he learn in that film? What does he really do? Does he, obviously, like, spoilers for Force Awakens, he dies. But in his death, there's no sacrifice to it. There's no decision he makes that he was struggling with before. His mission basically is like, I want my son to come back to me, and then he tries and he fails. And there's something that, it's not that it's bad. It's not that inherently it means the film is the word, anything like that. It just means that I remember the first time I watched Force Awakens not feeling that satisfied by it. Not feeling like there was a character here that I could really love or really get something out of. I didn't get anything out of Han Solo in the film. It, to me, felt like just an exercise in pandering to fans of the series. And it's okay to make the fans happy. Cobra Kai does it all the time. And in a risky way, because there are a lot of times where Cobra Kai does flashbacks that to some people won't even make sense. It's funny because I know so many people who really enjoy this show or have tried to enjoy this show they don't really care about the Karate Kid stuff. They may have seen it and forgot about it, or they never saw it at all. And I know people who are like confused by it at first because they're like, I just want to watch a good show. I don't need to see all these flashbacks to things that happened in the films. And to me, that's very interesting. And I think because Cobra Kai doesn't spend too much of its time going down that road, you end up with a show that people have to keep watching the next episode for, not because they want to see more callbacks to the movies, but because they're genuinely interested and invested in what's going to happen to these characters. I care about Johnny Lawrence in the show. I care about Daniel LaRusso. But if it was just about them, I don't think I would like this show nearly as much. I probably would have been really bored with it by now if they had gone a different direction. The reason the show keeps me hooked is because I care about Miguel, I care about Sam, and I care about Robbie. Now, with season 3, there are some things that the show has been doing that have been really rubbing me the wrong way with some of the characters. I think that it's ridiculous that Aisha is not in the show anymore, although they're saying she might be coming back. I think what they do with Robbie in season 3 just doesn't quite work. It's a good concept in theory, and I like where it might be going, but and it does have a decent payoff. But for the majority of season 3, I just could not really click with what they're trying to do with Robbie here. It just did not ring as, it felt rushed. It felt like it just didn't really make sense for the character. I think that he changes a bit too much. And you know what? They can do something with that. They can take the Robbie character and make a story out of like how he can be frustrated with the way his mentors let him down. But then I just think that where the show goes from there and how he reckons with that, it's like, again, I don't want to give anything away, but it doesn't make sense by my estimation. Cobra Kai is just one of those shows that really understands its audience and what its audience is looking for. Why was Karate Kid successful? I think I've even seen in the live chat, I'll bring it up here, and I think this is the key to it. It really is the layout of it. It's the story structure. I mention story structure all the time when I'm, talking about Pixar films, when I'm talking about movies and things that work, and it gets you a long way. It really does. You can have something that in execution shouldn't really work because, like, for example, Cobra Kai is very cheesy. It has a lot of elements that I normally would not like in a show, but the story structure is so solid that I find myself overlooking these flaws, or actually at times kind of relishing in the goofiness and the campiness, because I'm so comfortable with the story that everything else just sort of feels like it's part of the show and I can enjoy it the way it is. Not a lot of the shows are really good at doing that. I mentioned Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell is another good example. I think the show is better at incorporating its pre-existing characters. The Saved by the Bell reboot, a lot of the time the adults, like from the original Saved by the Bell show, they're not quite as interesting. I wasn't really interested in what was going on with them. I just found myself liking the new characters, honestly. I enjoyed the totally wholesale writing of those characters and their stories, and it's fine too, because the show can just be good at that. It doesn't have to like follow the exact same formula of what made Saved by the Bell successful. It's its own thing. And that is the other thing. Cobra Kai, by comparison, is its own thing. It's a different type of entertainment than the first Karate Kid. The first Karate Kid was we've seen that movie where it's like a kid down on his luck, he learns karate to defend himself, and it ends with a big bout. And then the show evolves the premise of it. There are still elements of that. We have a kid like Miguel in the first season who down on his luck, and he learns how to fight and protect himself, but it's by the villain of the first movie. That is the twist. That's the subversion and what makes it interesting. And then they add to that even more. And not only is Miguel like our the character going through that journey, but then we have Robbie going through a parallel journey and learning a different lesson. And these parallel lessons and the way they intersect and the way that there's really good points on both of these like viewpoints, and the frustration we see from the drama of like, well, why can't they come together and have to fight it out? That is what makes the show investing. That is why you want to keep watching, because you're curious what the end result is going to be. I was actually disheartened when I found out that the next season of the show will not be the last. Disheartened just in the sense that I feel like it's getting close to its natural conclusion. And if they keep spinning it around and doing more stuff to it, I worry that they're going to undermine the structure of what they've been building up to, and how it really is kind of moving toward a center where these characters really need to reach their full resolution. They're almost there. I think season 3 really does feel like the climax. And season 4 to me feels like it needs to finish things up and do it in a strong way that's worthy of what's come before. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know if other people agree with that. But if I can compare it to Star Wars, what was the chief criticism of Force Awakens, if you can recall? Too much like New Hope, right? The story structure was way too much like A New Hope. There wasn't enough subversion. There wasn't enough like, oh, it's like New Hope, but what if this had happened instead? Or what if it had been like this? Instead, it's kind of just a rehashing, right? It's a big reason why a lot of people like me really enjoyed The Last Jedi, because it was really just trying to be a totally original Star Wars movie, for better or worse. And then with Rise of Skywalker, to me, that was the worst case scenario. And that really just felt like total, like, throwing logic out the window. Nothing about it seemed to make sense to me. Watching it, I was really let down by Rise of Skywalker. And again, I'll just reiterate, Cobra Kai is different in a way that, no, it takes the basic, things that you like about Karate Kid and adds tons of new stuff to it that feels new. It feels like the focus. It's not new in terms of like, oh, it's, a new character, or it's like, oh, a girl is a Jedi now, or, oh, this person was a stormtrooper and does this, and all that stuff is fine. But what you need with nostalgia, because nostalgia, as Don Draper said, is delicate but potent, you need to give it energy. You need to give it something that, like, a self-sustaining energy, so that if somebody watches Cobra Kai and they've never seen the Karate Kid, they might be confused at first, but they have a reason to keep going. You can kind of figure it out eventually. And it also helps that Cobra Kai, like Star Wars, or like Karate Kid, like Star Wars, is so pop culturally beloved. People just really know that story, even if they don't know the fine details, even if they've never seen the Karate Kid. I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to figure out. Like, a lot of people know the bare bones of it, right? Same thing with Star Wars. But again, think back on Force Awakens. A lot of the moments of like people cheering in the theater for that movie were very specific callbacks you only remember if you would watch the movie a bunch of times, which for a lot of people work, but then for a whole other segment of audiences didn't work, because they haven't maybe seen Star Wars since they were kids, and they were like, well, I don't care about a chessboard showing up. Like, what's the plot? Where did the First Order come from? Who's the Resistance? I'm sorry I'm ranting about Star Wars, but I did promise that I was going to talk about how Cobra Kai succeeds when others fail. And I think that movie is a good example of like where it fails, even though it doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I'll say that one more time. And then I know I mentioned Men in Black International as another example. And, that's definitely an example of like, they tried to take just the universe and the sandbox of it, and there was an attempt to just sort of go from there and build out a different story. But what it's missing, because that's great in theory, that is a good idea, but then you also have to understand what made the universe successful in the first place. It's very difficult, is what I'm saying, because you run the risk of, is my show or movie that I'm using other people's universes, am I framing it and presenting it in a way that is going to be faithful to its previous success, without being slavish to it. And I would say that if I was teaching a course or something on how to write a TV show or how to harness nostalgia for entertainment, Cobra Kai would be easily one of like my prime case studies. I would start there. I would be like, your homework is watch the first season of Cobra Kai, and then we're going to go through the character relationships, how often they use flashbacks, how they incorporate the music, how they balance how the screen time for new characters and existing characters. And I would put all of that into a case study for this is how you're able to balance it in a way that is probably the best case scenario, probably the best version of the thing that you want and why people will respond to it. I probably never teach a college course. I do not plan on it, but if I did, that's basically where it would go. So I'm going to go to the live chat because I see some people have commented a bit. Okay, so Lauren says, I also like how they actually acknowledge and incorporate references from the second and third film and don't act like they exist. Or I guess I wonder if you're trying to say like they don't act like they don't exist. And yeah, that was something that did bother me a little bit in season 2. Is like, I was like, well, hey, what about Karate Kid 3? They do kind of mention stuff from Karate Kid 2, which I thought was interesting. Kind of. They don't really go into much detail with it, but and I think a little of it felt a little shoehorned, but it's there. And yeah, that is good. It's kind of like yeah, I guess like Men in Black International kind of acts like the other Men in Black movies don't exist. There's only like one scene that kind of references that stuff, but you don't have to, and it's by design. They don't want you to have to have seen the second Men in Black movie or the third one in order to watch International because, well, the third one and the second, they weren't that successful. People watched them, but not nearly as pop culturally relevant. And, the Lauren correct right after saying exactly they don't exist. There you go. Juanes wants to know, which is your favorite season? Good question. Probably the first season. And it's tough because I like different elements of each season better than the others. I think that season 2 has my favorite. Just my favorite. I think overall it's probably the strongest on balance. I think that like there's no weak moment in it. I think that it has really good rising tension. I think the beginning, middle, and end are all really good. The first season, I think, probably just has my favorite story structure. I think like the parallel viewpoints and the like philosophy of Miyagi-Do and the surprises of it, I think haven't quite been topped yet. The third season has my favorite conclusion. The final episode of season 3, I didn't think that they could top season 2. I'm one of the people who actually liked how season 2 ended. I think some people didn't. I think that, yeah, season 2 and season 3 and season 1, they all have really good endings. Really good. But what I like about the first season, is that it's not as clear cut. In the second season, and I'm this is kind of slight spoilers, but I'm not going to say anything specific. In the second season, I don't know, it just feels like the good guys keep winning and winning and winning, and like the third season too, like they have setbacks, but the show is kind of falling into a formula I don't like, which is that the bad guys, the Cobra Kai's, are like they're almost always losing the most important fights. Very rarely win. And what I like about the first season was the dichotomy of Miguel and Robbie, and how Miguel ends up, there's a question of Johnny actually like looking within himself and being like, am I doing the right thing here? I got what I wanted. And that to me was exciting. It was like when I felt like the show was really taking off. So not to take too much away from the second 2 seasons, I think that they're great in their own right. But there's something about the first season I think that really just like hit me in a good way, just thematically. Even though I think that the fights in the second and third season were way more satisfying. Like, I mean, just they were way more like, what is going on here? What is going to happen? The third season in particular, there's a certain fight that is inevitable. And also the third season whips. Whoa. That's how excited I am. It whips when it comes to Kreese and his backstory, which I thought was extremely well told and really intriguing, really added some layers to him as a villain. And yeah, bringing him to the forefront like that season did, I think was the right call. The structure is kind of similar to Legend of Korra, given that they both have first generation and second generation characters we focus on, and the need of context from the first show. Yeah, I'd say it's not that similar, but yeah, there's certainly some similar things. I think Legend of Korra is another show that mostly succeeded. But I think why that is because, first of all, Legend of Korra to me feels way more like a sequel and less like a nostalgia trip. Because that show only came out a few years after The Last Airbender ended. And to your point, it really didn't rely too much on the pre-existing characters. Our main character were totally new characters. We barely see Katara, we barely see Toph, we barely see Zuko, but we do get a lot of Tenzin, who is a new character and kind of represents, you know, in a more creative way. And I think that's why that dynamic really works. And J.K. Simmons, of course, absolutely sells Tenzin. Yeah, Korra is another good example of how to take something that was successful and do your own thing with it. It wasn't fully successful because I think the second season, as a lot of people will agree, overall just was not very good and kind of held the series back a bit. But other than that, I think the show was really strong when it came to, oh my gosh, the third and fourth season of Legend of Korra absolutely were incredible, particularly the third season. And they didn't rely much on nostalgia. And if anything, the third season was really good about that, was how the show challenged the preconceived notions of the White Lotus from the first show. And yeah, so many memorable moments in Legend of Korra, but especially season 3. Thoughts on the love triangles, the love squares. They've done a better job of it in the third season. I think it was getting a little tiresome. You know, it never was that bad or anything. I just think that in the third season, there is one romance, a re-romance that kind of gets rushed. There's a lot of like teenage drama, and that's fine because you kind of, that is authentic to the teenage experience. I mean, I know for me, we had all kinds of love triangles in high school, and that's the thing. And it's a good motivator, you know, for characters. I think the reason it works a little bit better in season 3 is because take the Sam character, and you know, there's even a point where her dad is like, you need to stop. Just, can you take a break from dating? You literally date constantly. And which is true. She just kind of needs to deal with her own stuff. And they mostly align with that. I think like her arc to me was made way more meaningful than any love triangle. And like, which boy is she going to pick? It was more meaningful for me watching her grapple with her trauma and what Tori did to her. And also with Tori, like getting to, you know, there is reason she has issue with Sam beyond what went down with Miguel. I think that stuff really works. I think they still made mistakes with Tori. I think she really spins out of control as a character for the most part. And I really wish that they would treat her character with a little bit more nuance like they have other characters in other seasons. But as we have now, it's fine. It's okay. All right, looks like that's the last of the questions. I hope Cobra Kai Season 4 is as good as Seasons 3 and 2 and 1. It's a show that I think the creators, they really know what they have here, and they really know that it's working. So I'm excited, you know, that it's now on Netflix, and we're going to see for the first time what Netflix is going to be able to do with the show, because Season 3 was already, like, it was already made. It was already a thing. It was already ready to go by YouTube. It just got switched over to Netflix. But now Netflix is the one that is going to be totally, you know, responsible for the success or failure of Season 4. Keep in mind, Season 3 is, I believe, still number 1, maybe. I know it's in the top 10 of Netflix right now. And yeah, there's good reason for that. It's a fantastic show. I hope I have done a good job of laying out the success of the show, why it works. If there's anything else I might have missed or anything else you want to add, of course, hit those comments up. And don't forget to follow me on here, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when I'm going live. Always love having you all in the live chat. Appreciate your questions and making this an interactive and fantastic experience for me.